Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Julie Martin. So Julie Martin is an experienced yoga teacher. She's based, I believe, right now in Goa, India. She founded something called Brahmani Yoga. Like me, she has an interest in getting yoga off the mat and, of course, as embodiment. So Julie, also dance background, should mention that. Julie, welcome.
Hi.
Hello. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
And you're in Goa, India, right?
Currently, I'm in Goa, so I'm right in between teacher training and getting ready to start a retreat. So I've got a bit of buffer zone,
Got it.
which is nice.
Nice, yeah. Nice. And I also heard you used to teach in Brighton years ago, though I never did one of your classes. So I'm slightly confused because it does sound like you're not from Brighton, but you ended up here. So what's the story of that? How did you go from, I'm guessing, the States to Brighton to Goa?
Yeah, so I started life in Los Angeles and was, simultaneously trained as a dancer from a young age. That's what I fell in love with movement first then. But also my parents were Vedantists. So I grew up studying Advaita Vedanta and studying, like a kid. I was, that's the information I was given as a child growing up. All things yoga, except for no asana. My parents weren't even remotely into the hatha, asana, that kind of stuff. It was all about raja, meditation. But when I was about 19 years old, I decided I wanted to leave Southern California for no other practical reason than there must be someplace else better to live, and found myself in the UK because I thought I spoke the language.
Yes, well, there's a mistake.
I'll go someplace that I speak the language. Well, it takes you a couple of weeks to realize you haven't got a clue.
So you swapped the sunshine for the boys with cute English accents.
That's correct. Good draw.
And so you were teaching in Brighton.
I ended up teaching dance in Brighton. And then I got my yoga start through the Brighton Natural Health Center with a amazing teacher who taught Iyengar style, ironically, called Ruth Curtis.
Okay, don't know her.
If you've been around Brighton, everybody knows who Ruth Curtis was. She was a student of Iyengar himself. So, but she was so compassionate and so beautiful and such like your grandma. So it was a nice introduction to the asana world for me.
Right, so that's Natural Bodies run by Gary Carter, who I've had. It was, I think.
No, that's the Brighton Natural Health Center.
Oh, so the other one. So sorry, I'm thinking of Natural Bodies.
Back in the day,
Natural Health Centers, they're around the corner. Yeah. Okay.
Those were the two places you could actually do yoga classes outside the Buddhist Center. The Buddhist Center also had some yoga classes, but those were actually the only three places you could do yoga. And this was probably about 1995, I guess. Earlier than that, maybe even. Yeah.
Okay. And then eventually you were longing for the sun again, was it? And decided to head off to Goa. Was that the draw, or what got you out there?
Well, it was interesting because I was one of those people that I ended up moving from the Iyengar world into the Ashtanga world through Derek Ireland, who was also a Brightonian and one of the most popular European Ashtanga teachers when he was alive. And there was a period of time where, there was still hardly anybody was really that interested in yoga, at least in the UK. And then Derek passed away. His wife moved back to Greece, and literally within, 2 or 3 weeks of her leaving Brighton, Sting and Madonna came out and said, "We look like this because we do Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga." And I was one of the few people. I was just teaching 2 classes a week. There was maybe, I think, 2 other teachers in Brighton, 1 or 2 in London, and that was it. And I all of a sudden got inundated with work.
Yeah. And
so I went from being a dance teacher and teaching a couple of yoga classes a week to being an enormously in-demand yoga teacher and only dance a couple times a week. And I actually after about 5 years, I got burnt out. And that's really what led me to leave Brighton and go somewhere where I thought I would just teach 1 class a day and spend the rest of the time relaxing and chilling out. And instead I got there and opened up a studio, which isn't relaxing at all and isn't a lot of time on the beach. But that was kind of my sort of trajectory through the planet.
Okay, so you've ended up in Goa. Now, I've got kind of prejudices against Goa, so maybe it's time I actually found out a bit more about it. Like, I went there briefly when I was 16, and I could tell it was sort of a bit of a hippie mecca. And there seems to be, like, I have kind of friends of mine who spend seasons there. They might go there for a few months, like Norwegian friends who go there to escape the winter, like Bali or Thailand. And it seems like there's a pretty developed yoga scene there, particularly of kind of like Western yogis, right? Like it's people from Russia and England and America and, France and Germany. Like there's a kind of scene there, right? So what is this sort of Goan yoga scene like? Because I have never seen that.
Okay, the Goan yoga scene is something that's fairly new, actually, because when I first came here, it was just like that hippie vibe, like you would have experienced. Lots of hippies, lots of trance parties, just a small amount of Indian tourists, and really, again, just a few places you could do yoga. But then as more people started doing yoga, and of course more people were coming through Goa on their way either to Mysore, up to Pune, Rishikesh, all of the, sacred places of yoga, they realized this is a cleaner, do we know if it's cleaner? It was cleaner environment, a little bit more relaxed. And also there was, myself and a few other teachers teaching yoga designed for Westerners instead of yoga designed for Indian bodies and enforcing that on Westerners. So it just became this, people started popping up yoga retreat centers, yoga facilities, a shack on the beach, restaurant at nighttime, you can do yoga in the morning. And that just started to proliferate really over the last about 5 years or so.
Oh, really? As soon as that, because it was the sort of fairly hedonistic kind of party place, right?
Yeah.
And kind of drugs and kind of crazy dance parties and that kind of thing. It was sort of known as a place where maybe, I don't know, you've been in the Israeli army and you've got some money and you went out and just went and got stoned, like heavily stoned for a while, or, I've got a lot of friends that have been out there, for example. Okay. And is it a bit weird that there's sort of all these Westerners in kind of like one bit of India? I saw a picture from a friend of mine. I was quite surprised. It was sort of all white people, in a yoga class. And it just seemed like, okay, they're renting their house out. And I'm not challenging you personally here because I don't know your circumstances, but they were basically renting their house out in England. Someone else was paying for them to live like a king in Goa. And I kind of just thought, is that ethical? And there seems to be a whole scene of a nomadic scene of yoga teachers who travel between Goa and Thailand and Bali, and sort of this attempt to continuously live in paradise. And I don't know, maybe I'm just jealous, waking up on a cold British day. So I'm quite open to the fact I'm completely just prejudiced about this. But there's something in that Goan scene that I've heard about that makes me go, I wouldn't want to go out there. And I'm trying to figure out what that is.
Yeah. Okay. So it's actually kind of multi-layered there, because there is something about having lived for, nearly 18 years in the UK. And seeing that kind of mentality, like you're experiencing, that there's something unethical about that is really interesting. And I think that's British guilt over the, like the Raj era or something. Yeah. But I think the truth is first of all, in Goa, no Goans do yoga.
Right.
Like it's not a thing for them. They're predominantly Catholic. Yeah. Especially along the coastline. I mean, the Catholics are the ones that kind of developed the ports, the Portuguese and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's Portuguese.
So it was like hugely, run by the Portuguese, I think ruled for 600 years. It didn't have any British influence, almost none at all. And so they don't care. The Goans don't care. And the Indian teachers that are here are from somewhere else as well. So that kind of puts us all in a similar boat. We're all from somewhere else teaching yoga on Goan land, technically. And for me, I don't know if it's my American upbringing, but actually what we do is we have fueled the economy in a way that does not equal like more alcoholism, more drugs, more motorcycle deaths, more people trashing hotel rooms and stuff like that. So that the community here loves the yoga tourist.
Okay, so there is a sort of putting back into the community, like there's a risk of sort of almost neo-colonialism, and that there isn't there. You know, like I remember lying on a beach in Goa and having to sort of put up a flag, and some guy came along and gave me a drink, and it was just, and it was this very interesting experience because within a few days I got quite used to it, kind of living like a king. And you know, it seems like there's a sort of people can earn, you know, £1 in England, or they've got someone else paying, you know, rent, just got lucky and got on the housing ladder in Brighton a few years ago before it was ridiculous, and kind of, you know, can rent that place out and live like a king kind of on the benefits of that. And, you know, £1 goes a long way, right, in terms of rupees.
Right. Yeah, it does. You know, and I think if that's what they want to do, I mean, me personally, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Like I could not just hang out here and like I work my ass off.
Yeah, I'm sure I do. Yeah.
And then as soon as I'm done working, I'm out of here now. Like I don't, like I've got to, you know, I got to go somewhere else and work.
Yeah.
I don't.
You travel a lot, right?
Yeah, I do.
I'd love to hear about that, because it seems like I do workshop. I have a base, you know, in Brighton. I'm maybe here 50% of the time, 2/3 if I'm lucky, and then I'm traveling around mostly Europe doing workshops. Like I was just in Amsterdam, and I know yoga teachers who just go continuously on the road. It's like they're from Thailand to the UK to Goa to Bali to the USA. Like that must be a pretty, like on the one hand amazing, but on the other hand pretty uprooted, and like from, let's talk about embodiment as this is the show, like it must be a pretty difficult lifestyle, that sort of uprooted embodiment. I'm sure you're in contact with lots of, I looked at your yoga teacher group and a lot of them said sort of traveling yoga teacher, you know, like maybe half of them. That must be pretty difficult.
Yeah, it's something that is interesting because it was never my choice. Like I did not engineer my life this way. And that's something I have to explain to a lot of new teachers, because they've just finished their teacher training and then they say, well, I want to be like you. How do I travel around the world and teach yoga? And literally it's like, I don't have an answer for you, because I did not do it this, I never meant to do it this way. Yeah. But if what happened, it was just necessity in the end of the day, because you're in Goa, be in Goa for like 8 months of the year. And then, as we've already discussed, loads of foreigners are here doing yoga at Brahmani Yoga. And so it was people from, you know, all over Europe, the Middle East, Australia, Japan, everywhere. And because I'm always more passionate about what I'm teaching, like becoming a better teacher, and not necessarily out there marketing myself. I wasn't out there going, hey, you've got a studio in Japan, you should invite me, right? Yeah. I didn't ever do that, ever. I've never invited myself anywhere. People started asking me. They were like, I love your classes. What do you do in the summer? We'd love to host you in Stockholm or Iceland or whatever. And that's how it started. And then as the market got more inundated here in Goa, and also, you know, my partner is from Hawaii, and he said, all of this is very nice, Julie, but we're moving back to Hawaii. And I was like, oh, okay. It's now a necessity for me to continue to go back to Europe once or twice a year, teach all of the places that I teach, and then, you know, when I'm at home, I don't work at all. Yeah. Like when I go back to Hawaii, I realized that's it. You have to switch off. You cannot be a teacher. You have to just be a human. You have to get back into grounding.
Yeah, the ground part of the embodiment, isn't it? Of constantly flying. And, you know, I mean, I feel that literally in my body, you know, like my tree pose is less stable after I've been flying. And it could be physiological, but I wonder if there isn't also a psychological uprooting that's kind of part of that. And it has become like, for some of younger yoga teachers, it's like, okay, I've done my 200-hour teacher training in Goa. I've got my Instagram account. I'm young and I'm pretty. Surely I can just travel the world now. And what they don't necessarily realize is people like you have just put years into building a following, and not necessarily consciously, even from a marketing point of view, but just doing what you love and serving and giving. And it's like, okay, after a while, you start to get invites places. And it's actually a bit of a joke now, like, for example, on Tinder, that kind of yoga teacher is like every second young woman's occupation, you know? And and I've got a student of mine who's a very young, beautiful Russian girl, and she does live that dream of traveling around, and she's not very happy, is my sense. You know, she's
Right.
living the dream. All the pictures are fantastic, you know, professionally shot of her. She's got 50,000, you know, Instagram followers, whatever. And she often just doesn't look that happy to me. And I wonder if community and ongoing community is part of happiness, but also in terms of like accountability, it keeps us honest, right? Like and I'll speak from my own experience because I'm not without, you know, I'm almost in this world. Like,
Yeah.
I can just parachute into a city and I can be cool for a couple of days. And, you know, even if I'm with the host and taking me for dinner, I can, if I want, put on a front for a couple of days or even a week, you know, for an intensive. But that's much harder to do when you're living with people year in, year out. They're seeing you, your dirty underwear. And it's like, there's a risk of that sort of, the trap of purity, I think they call it in Buddhism, that we can pretend to be too pure and it creates this huge shadow. You know, there's a way in which we can fake it for a week, but not when we're living in community with people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean by that. And I don't put on a front for other people. And I'll tell you what makes me happy when you talk about the woman that's not happy is because perhaps her goal was seen from the outside, right? And for me, the traveling and the different places and stuff like that is not the goal, right? For me, I get that sense the minute I walk into a room, and I'm usually somewhere for a week at a time when I'm in Europe. Here I have the luxury of being here for a month or 2 months at a time. I walk into the room, there's a group of people, and what I have to share is so important. And I see the light bulbs go on. Yeah. And then I'm home. Yeah. And I'm like, this is what I need to be doing. And for when I'm happiest is when I'm inside the yogashala, not traipsing around taking lots of pictures of myself posing on some frickin' statue, you know, in the middle of Copenhagen. That's not my job. My job is literally to be there and give these people information that they're not getting in their regular yoga classes. Yeah. And the day that happens, the day I've trained enough people, or all of us that are out there trying to change the way we're looking at the movement practice, the more of us that are out there, that trickle-down effect means eventually I won't have to travel. The minute I show up and people are going, yeah, we've heard all of this. We're in there already. We're already in here. Yeah. Then I know, okay, my job's done. I can go, I don't know, train horses or something.
Yeah, you know, it almost doesn't matter that, as you say, like it's not about, there's a sort of middle-class consumerism of tourism and travel and kind of just a sort of ticking of boxes and of impressing people with the pictures, as you say, doing the kind of dancer pose on the statue or the temple or whatever. And there's a way in which that's a kind of consumerism, I think. And what I've seen in some of my students that have had that is they wanted that dream, but then they saw through it and they went, actually, this is just another kind of consumerism. It doesn't make you any happier than trying to buy the Mercedes. Do you know what I mean? And Absolutely. Like, I'm the same with you. Like, just give me a room full of 10 willing people and I'm good. Like, you know, I mean, it's nice to be somewhere pleasant like Amsterdam, but it doesn't really matter. Do you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, I'm just in a room. You know, like I'm in a room and the people who want to learn is the thing for me. Like, okay, great. They want to learn. I've got something to offer these people. You know, they can't get this information, this experience easily. So great. That's why I'm here. It sort of doesn't matter. I want to come back to like the embodied approach you're doing. Obviously, that's going to be a big chunk of the conversation. But before you said something interesting, which I wanted to come back to, you talked about yoga for Indians versus Europeans. Yeah. Would say more about that. I'm curious about that.
Okay, so I'm sure I'm not the first person on your podcast to mention the fact that the yoga that we've inherited, the asana that we've inherited, that for many years we thought was traditional and we called it classic and it's 5,000 years, blah, 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 right?
It's just not true.
It was, yeah, exactly. You know, it's like, that's my favorite thing to do. It's just like, let's bust some of these myths so we can free ourselves up, right? And one of the biggest ones is that, you know, these practices were designed and practiced almost exclusively by Indian men. Yeah. You only have to spend a couple of days in India to figure out Indian men have different body shapes than even Western men. Knees in India tend to be bigger.
Interesting.
And less less density in the flesh. Like you don't see Indians with thick thighs. They have thicker feet. The squatting, right? So the knee actually becomes more of a stability mechanism, because you think about the thousands of years of squatting, right? Which we've removed over the last 1,000 years. Yeah. And their pelvis is shaped different. And then you go into the male, female, the female pelvis, any race is different than the male, for very good reason. It has to be expandable to give birth. Men's, sacrum's few. So you have all of these things, and Indians themselves, first of all, they don't care what things look like anyway. They're not interested in that. They're not interested in perfection of an asana. They're just do it. And if you're complaining, it's because, you're just a spoiled little child. And that's how they taught, teenage Indian boys to begin with, especially Krishnamacharya's lineage, was like, this is what we're going to instill.
That's Ashtanga and Iyengar. That's most yoga in the West, basically. Most asana practice in the West comes from that lineage. Yeah,
it's filtered through there, and so there wasn't, and for good reason. I always say we cannot blame these men. Yeah. These men aren't forward thinking another 100 years into the future, going someday a load of middle-aged Western
office workers in Paris are going to be doing this. Yeah, they weren't thinking that.
It wasn't their job to change it up. They had a demographic. They worked with what they knew, right? Yeah. The problem that I always say to people is we have to remember, when we inherited it, nobody asked questions, because we also inherited that, it's the guru. Don't question.
We talk about this a lot on the show, the guru system, and how, that relationship to authority, and, does it fit with Western mindset? Is it any good? Just basically, without being too blunt about it. And as you say, there's physiological differences, and people are very shy to talk about this, because I find like people, particularly Americans, actually almost sounds like racism. And it's not. It's just talking about physiology. Like a pygmy looks different from a Maasai. That's not racism. Right. These are different physiologies. No one's going to, a 5 foot tall pygmy and a 6'2" Maasai. They're clearly different physiologies. Differences in muscle mass between groups of people. To say men and women have physiological differences is not sexist. There's a reason there's different Olympic, it's just the way it is. Your pelvis and mine are different. And
truth. I have such a hard time sometimes with people challenge me. I'm like, I'm just telling you the truth. I mean, you choose to believe it or not. Yeah. But it's like we have a plethora of evidence that says yes. Northern Europeans, their DNA developed differently from Africans, differently from Indians, and all you have to do is spend some time in China. And so we have to embrace those differences and give ourselves permission to do the practice from inside. And for me, that's where, if we work from the inside instead of from the outside, we don't have to worry about the injuries. We don't have to worry about, how can I get better at this?
Yeah. So when you say work from the inside, I'm basically hearing, and I guess this is why you recommended to me, an embodied or a somatic approach to yoga, so that it's the feeling rather than the shape that's primary. Is that fair to say? So I've never been in one of your classes. I'd like to, but I've never been in one of your classes. So I'm trying to kind of imagine what does that look like then? If I have my own version of embodied yoga, but for your point of view, like what does an embodied approach to yoga, what does that look like? Give you some of the real nuts and bolts of that.
It's multi-layered, because what I realized first, and I think this is why I do keep getting invited back to places over and over again, because first of all, and myself included, when I first started doing Iyengar yoga and then moved on to Ashtanga, it was from the outside, like this is what it should look like. Keep practicing it until you get there. Or
even just doing things to account, or do you know what I mean? With
how you breathe, all of those sort of things. So what we did is we took this essentially tantric based practice that wasn't about what it looks like. And any Indian, again, they don't care about alignment. They don't care about where their body. Just do it, And so what I realized first and foremost is that people were not in their bodies anymore. Yeah. I was teaching groups of people that I thought, you have no idea what you feel right now, because you have been trained to focus on an external view of the shape you're making. Yeah. And so like the first layer. It was like,
Well, I just want to underline that because it's really important and it's so rare to have this insight. I think for me and you, it's obvious, but I don't think it is for everyone that if you're
right.
focusing on what a shape looks like, the Iyengar drew the lines on the, it has to be straight this way or that way, despite the fact human beings are not straight lines. You're not focused on the somatic experience. So you cannot be focused fully on that
Right.
somatic experience if you're, so essentially at that point, yoga is a dissociative practice. It's encouraging people to not be in their bodies. It's the absolute opposite of what someone's intention might be doing that. So I just wanted to underline that because it's slowing it down and saying, look, this is huge,
It is huge. And for so many people, when you just start you don't give them a shape, you ask them to experience a sensation first, like don't move. I just want you to feel how your hand touched the floor. No, let's take it back off again. How did your hand touch the floor? What did that feel like? What did it feel like in the finger pads, the heel of the hand? Like really find that 4 or 5 times. And I don't care where your hand ends up, but be so fascinated that you've just grown this thing today. And this is the most amazing thing you've seen for years. Like have that experience. And so I had to teach that first. I had to teach, I am not going to say Trikonasana, Pajvakonasana, or anything like that. I'm going to talk about a sensation first. And of course, I had a couple of years where everybody's like, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean feeling? Like there's too much going on now, And
people can get lost in that as well, can't they? Particularly kind of more beginners to it. They're like, just tell me what to do. Because it's Eric Fromm wrote this book called The Fear of Freedom. And it's basically like why fascism is appealing. And I feel like it really applies to beginner yogis. It's like, just tell me the right way to do it. And it can be quite frustrating for them to not, that's why you see maybe people do a few years of Ashtanga or Iyengar or whatever before they're ready sometimes for a more mature somatic approach. Then there's all this stuff to undo at that point. But, I wonder if just to play devil's advocate a little, if I may, if something isn't lost, though, in a totally kind of feeling, kind of slightly more free-form approach. I mean, there's something in the discipline of doing the thing, even if it's difficult, right?
Yeah, of course, because for me, once people understand, okay, this is how Julie works. You have to go in with a different frame of reference. And of course I lost loads of students. I used to teach Ashtanga, right? And I lost loads of students because one thing I realized, and I think this is another important thing to underline, is that a lot of people now use movement to escape what they feel.
It's the dissociative yoga again. So it's either using shape or intensity to escape feeling. Because I was in a yoga class the other day in London. It was a super vinyasa class. Loved the teacher, but he was going so fast and it was so hard. Even as a fairly strong guy, I was like, I cannot be aware of my emotional state right now. Even as someone that's practiced mindfulness of emotions for many years, it was very tricky. Just because it was so athletic, all I was aware of was burning thighs, sweat pouring off me. And I was just like, I'm just trying to survive. I'm not really aware. And at that point, that's a way out of the emotional body, right? And it's like, that's the last thing I want. I'm trying to get in touch with myself.
Escapism.
Yeah. Yoga is escapism, really, isn't it?
And I don't think, I always remind people, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, go do CrossFit. Go do mad sort of like triathlons and stuff like that. Push your limits if that's what fuels you and you need that endorphin rush, but don't do it in your yoga. Like let your yoga be the thing that nurtures you, that brings you back inside. Let it be something separate,
Well, there needs to be an alignment between the form of the practice and the aim of the practice, right? Yeah. So if the aim of the practice is just to get fit or even, to have a holiday, it's kind of nice to have a holiday sometimes, just to be, what, right now I don't want to feel, I'm in grief and I just need half an hour of just fucking not being with that. I just need a break from my grief right now, okay. Fine, but it's like, I think there's something about honesty here as well. The thing that used to bother me, and it doesn't so much these days, was really used to bother me at one point was the dishonesty of saying, okay, this is a spiritual practice or a mindfulness practice, and the reality of the method just not matching that. And at first I thought, well, these people aren't stupid. So it's something, it felt kind of something dishonest with how it would be, sometimes it was just ignorance. And sometimes it was something almost like a sort of fooling oneself, like a veneer of yeah, this is a spiritual practice, but actually it's really about getting skinny to meet society's standards. So I look, you know,
Right.
so, and I see this in Russia a lot, for example. You've probably met the Russians in Goa as well, like attitude,
Yeah.
body, beautiful yoga and things like that. And
Oh,
it's about
in
alignment.
so many places, you know, and it's, you know, yeah, you know, the whole thing, oh, get your yoga body for the summer. It's like, oh my God, you know, I'm always telling, you know, the real practice of yoga, like, you know, it's designed, again, in that tantric hatha, the traditional, like, you know, what we look back, what was the hatha yoga going for? You know, it should put you in your parasympathetic nervous system, which basically means it's not time to burn calories there.
Yeah.
I always say to people, it's not very efficient to burn calories until you turn it into exercise. And it's not at all. It's not cardiovascular.
It's not a good calorie burning anyway.
Making it cardiovascular, you're moving into your sympathetic nervous system far too much. It's not, it's probably bringing you an endorphin rush. That's great.
Yeah.
And again, I would say, it's okay. It's okay.
Julie, can you slow down a little bit talking of parasympathetic? Just, I'm aware I tend to speak too quickly often, and there's a lot of, like 50% of the listeners, English isn't their first language. So I've been told to slow down. So that's a reminder to myself. But I think if we both slow down, it will help the many Germans and Swedes and all the others who are listening out there.
Good.
So let's follow that a minute. So you're in Goa, you're meeting all kinds of sort of people from all over the world, right? So I saw on your teachers list, there's, you know, all sorts of nationalities there. I mean, the cultural body is kind of one of the ongoing themes of this podcast. So is there anything you've seen in terms of people coming from different countries to work with you, and either attitudes to learning or embodiments, anything you want to add on that? Because you've got a pretty rich experience of different nationalities there. It's a bit of a melting pot, isn't it, Goa?
It is. And I'm so grateful for that. But I can tell you in terms of, you know, what I teach and what I'm trying to bring people to, I can tell you across almost every single culture, people feel unworthy. Unworthy. Like that's what I get everywhere.
So not just the European cultures, but also kind of cultures from elsewhere around the world. Yeah. So that's fascinating. So let's talk about that. What is that, and where does it come from?
Pressure of society, and it's getting worse because now more than ever your life, every minute of your life is essentially visible and they're judged. And it's amazing how now you know, like we were talking earlier about, you know, oh, you've got 50,000 Instagram followers, you're doing a retreat in Thailand, and blah blah blah, but are you happy? Like how can you keep going forward in a world where you're constantly in the background, you're worried about what people think of you, and whether that comes culturally from your parents or your school. Of course, the further you go in Asia, especially Eastern, you know, people from Singapore and stuff like that, it definitely comes directly from your family. In terms
of sort of shaming and belittling, and you're not good enough. And because on the one hand, you'd expect all this kind of, you know, Instagram followers, whatever, to give us a lot of validation, right? But and, you know, there's an interesting fact in the UK, teenage pregnancy's gone down, and they think that it's because the young girls are getting their validation from social media and not from boys directly, as it were. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating theory. It's because it's a real direct line correlation. You know, so it's interesting, like there's still like what causes that unworthiness. On the one hand, it's like, wow, we're got everything, you know what I mean? Like I'm well fed, I'm talking to an interesting person, I'm going to go for a sauna with my wife after this. Like I have this luxurious life. So, I mean, I can understand some people have quite belittling parents. Mine were super encouraging. I feel, you know, very lucky about that. But, you know, I'm still curious, like, where does this unworthiness in society come from? Is it just a sort of self-judging? Like, what is that?
I think, you know, like what you just touched upon, like, you know, we're living in a world now where there's like less poverty than ever. And most of us are privileged. If you turn back time 200 years, most of us are living, you know, like in extreme privilege. And I think it's the first time, because we don't have to worry about our survival. We don't have to worry about where our food's coming from. We don't have to worry about these things. All of a sudden we can be reflective, which I think is the initial reason yoga became so popular, because no matter how you walked in the door, eventually you realized, not everybody, but it gives you the opportunity to realize, wait a minute, it's there's something else in there. I'm not just a body making shapes. Hopefully you were led down that road eventually. And I think because we are allowing ourselves to be watched, we're putting ourselves out there to be seen, all of a sudden it's almost like you're watching the movie of your life instead of living your life.
Again, that's another dissociative thing, isn't it? That it becomes about how you look, and it becomes very hard to be in the sort of somatic sense if you're constantly doing a PR job. Some of my younger friends, particularly, maybe I'm just getting old and cantankerous here, but it just seems like they're running a PR operation. It seems like their entire life is public relations,
Yeah.
And so the focus is outside in rather than inside out.
Yeah. And this is something I feel so drawn by people to keep talking about this, because it's really what nurtures. I was just in Dubai. I was teaching 18, mostly under sort of 40. Most of the group was under 40. Some of them only been teaching for a couple years.
Yeah.
You could just feel the pressure in the room. Who in the room's got the most Instagram followers in a very, very materialistic society? And I said to them, the first thing you have to do is when you walk into the room, tell yourself, I am not here to make friends. This is not about my popularity. This is about my integrity of what I have to offer.
Yeah.
And if they don't like it, they'll find another teacher.
Yeah.
And if I end up with no students, I've realized this isn't my calling, right?
Yeah.
I can guarantee you the students will come. We have to let ourselves off the hook and say, I've studied for X amount of years. I believe in what I have to share. And I believe that is valid. And I'm going to share it in my own way and connect to people in real life. And I'm not going to worry if somebody next door is busting out 1 million handstands and doing 57 vinyasas because everybody in that room wants an exercise class.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. You shouldn't let that change what you eat, what you post, if you post anything. And you could feel, I always feel the collective thank you in the room. It's like,
people just need that permission. And ironically, I've taught marketing to yoga teachers, and that is good marketing. I mean, good marketing is always divisive because it's always niched, particularly in a crowded market, which yoga is now almost all over the world.
Yeah.
That that kind of self-belief, and I think sometimes the Americans do better on the self-belief than the British. I feel like there's a way in which British unworthiness isn't kind of like crying and being upset, but there's a kind of like, I just shouldn't put myself out there, and right. I get a lot of pushback from my British friends. When I started embodied yoga principles, for example, a lot of the pushback was from the Brits. And the Americans were like, "Oh, you're doing your thing. That's awesome. You do your thing. Eddie Izzard, go put babies on spikes. There's a whole sketch." And it's like, that's what my friends are like. My British friends were like, "Oh, you're doing something new. Who do you think you are?" Was the kind of tone. There's a sort of belittling that comes out of the unworthiness in the UK. And I think a lot of Europe has that. It's like I see a lot of well-known American yoga teachers, and I wonder if that kind of confidence and self-belief, which can get obnoxious, but isn't part of their success as yoga teachers in a way that some of the Swedes have it a little bit, because they've got a sort of empire without the guilt thing going on. But like I don't see many European countries that are able to have that, like, that self-confidence to put it out there in a big way, whatever they're doing, and to just turn up and be like, you know what, I'm going to offer what I offer, and people don't like it, that's fine. Like, there does seem to be some cultural factors there, and I imagine some of the Southeast Asians are even more on that scale.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's interesting to me because I have lived in both worlds.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't know is that appearance of amazing self-confidence in the United States doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going on underneath.
Sure, it's a marketing scheme. It's not necessarily there isn't. I always say it's self-confidence, but not always self-love. And in Russia, what I always say is big ego, low self-esteem. That's the Russian version, which is like, there's someone who's like, I'm an amazing, beautiful Russian girl, but actually I hate myself. Right. Those things there's an inner life which can be different, right?
Yeah. There's definitely a fake it till you make it mentality in the States. Like, go out there and believe in yourself. And even though you might not have the confidence to believe in yourself, you're going to pretend like you yourself because you don't want anybody else to think you don't.
Yeah.
Whereas in UK, it's the opposite. Don't let anybody know you believe in yourself.
Yeah. Who do you think you are? But it's sort of dangerous as well, that self-belief, because you'll have someone who's beautiful, they've got the Instagram followers, so they've got validation, certain validation from that. And it's very easy for that, if they have that self-confidence, to start, I don't know, start doing their own teacher training after a very short amount of training themselves or whatever, without the sort of years of background in embodied art. So I see the seduction. I see, like, if I look at some of my students who are, young and beautiful, and they have lots of validation from the social media, there's a real seduction in them thinking they're better than they are. And it's do you know what I mean? And I see my students struggle with that, and the smarter ones kind of catch themselves, and then they kind of reset their humility. But some of them just don't. I remember I had one student who I didn't pass on something because they didn't show up for part of the course, and they were incensed. It was real, like, narcissistic rage, And it was like, well, I'm sorry, you didn't show up for the whole course, so I can't give you a certificate. That's a requirement that says up front. And they were just so used to getting what they wanted through being really pretty, pretty and really popular. And everyone was like saying, don't do it, Mark. They're one of the most popular teachers. I won't say the country, but they're one of the most popular teachers in this country. Don't do it. She's got a lot of power, essentially, And I was just like, nah. And it was weird. This young girl had all this kind of power and all this ego around it.
Entitlement. That's not confidence. That's entitlement.
She's under 30, been doing yoga for like 5 years.
Right. Yeah. And often I think sometimes that's, I see it mostly in the younger generation of yoga teachers that maybe they've only practiced for a couple of years. They did a 200-hour training, which I don't believe in. I think 200 hours should just be a foundation course. Yeah. That's like, don't get me on my soapbox about that. But what they do is perhaps they come from a finance background or a marketing background or a corporate background, and they see dollar signs or pound signs, and they think, look, how did that studio actually make money? Well, they did a teacher training. So I know as long as I've got my 200 hours and then I do X amount of teaching, which maybe only takes me 2 years, I can then make that money. They don't ever stop and think, have I got anything to offer people? Yeah.
And I sort of, those that are good at marketing, I kind of can't blame them, because that's just what they know and that's what they do. Maybe they have a dance background as well, which I know you have, but it can make like the sort of New York dance aesthetic yoga teacher. I was talking to Ariana Rabinovich about this. She's a sort of, how can I put it? She's not the sort of skinny New York dance teacher, and she's competing with those people in New York. She works in New York. She wrote a great book called Yoga Myths. I recommend to everyone. You'd probably love it. And she was talking about competing, because they had the body and the flexibility already, and then they had the marketing skills. Maybe they had the rich husband who worked in finance, who was actually bankrolling them to sort of market themselves and set up their first teacher trainings. And there isn't necessarily that integrity of like, okay, is there something that's original, that's needed, that's being offered here? Instead of, I feel like I could easily get into cantankerous old man mode here. So, like, what is it? What is the main thing you offer, Julie? I want to find out one of these days. But what is the main thing you're teaching in your courses?
Oh God, I don't. I think because it's so many different layers from me. It's really about, can I come back home to my body, and in the tantric philosophy, use the body as a tool to discover what's there, to really know myself. And if that means know my emotional self, or know my mental state more clearly, or even know my spiritual self, I want to use all of the practices. So it's not, the asana is step one, because I think we live in a society that's too sedentary most of the time. Yeah. And so, of course, the asanas are appealing. So movement becomes appealing. And I always say to people, I'm not throwing all of these traditional, in air quotes, asana out the window. But what I am doing is saying, can I let go of alignment? Can I let go of what it looks like? And can I tune into sensation and movement? And one of the ways that I do that is through repetition within a class. So the one thing that I do take from my dance background And I think you do it in martial arts and stuff like that as well. You learn a sequence, which might be your warm-up sequence, and you repeat that.
Yeah.
You do it again, and you add something on that's a little bit more.
And this is something I like about Ashtanga. Like, I'm in a vinyasa class yesterday, Ashtanga-based vinyasa class yesterday, and it was like I've been in that class quite a lot of times, and because it's not crazy full on, but it's repetitive, and I go, okay, because it's repetitive, I can sort of let go a little bit of the form and wondering where my feet go. And we had a Ashtanga teacher on, Ryan Spielman, on here, and he'd said the same thing. Like, there's something nice about I can really focus on something a little bit more interesting when I know the moves, you know? So there is, and people always want something new and something exciting and something that's going to super physically challenge them quite often. But if they do that, it's like constantly having a new girlfriend and never getting to know someone. Do you know what I mean? It's like where's the depth in that? And I feel like repetition, while it might be, there's a stage of being boring, that's part of the process, right? How you deal with the boredom is very useful for that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the most beautiful things about the Ashtanga practice is that, you know, you have that honeymoon period where once you understood, okay, I basically know what comes next. I don't need somebody to tell me. And you have that beautiful honeymoon period for about 2 years, dependent on who you are, that you all of a sudden feel things. You do actually feel things. But of course, then you get over obsessed about how far you're going in the series and you want to go on to second series and third series. So that's one reason that it becomes then an external practice. And also the fact that repeating anything over years in the same linear fashion is just not going to be a good idea physically in the long run.
Yeah, it's a repetition.
What I do is I repeat sequences, like if I'm teaching the public and say I'm teaching for, you know, like general public classes, like on a drop-in basis, I would teach the same sequence over 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And within that class, we repeat. It becomes circular, right?
Yeah.
It becomes circular. And so I always say the first round, your thinking mind is there. The second round, a little bit less thinking, a little bit more feeling. The third round, I want you to then make it your own. And that's the videos that I put up on my Facebook page. And that's when you see some of the most beautiful things happen because people are so in their bodies and it's not a room of dancers and self-expression arises, right? And, you know, or what you see is, you know, trauma arises or fear arises or whatever. But you give them that opportunity to dive in, and each layer, I step away. I cannot be in control of your practice. I can only be here to hold space and guide you through that process. And so for me, in terms of movement, I see it work, and I see it really brings people to a sense of being embodied pretty quickly, unless they're just going to use it as, well, if I keep doing this and I just do it faster, she won't notice, I won't notice how I feel, and then I can do Shavasana and go home. You know, there's always one or two that I see, okay, they're not ready to feel. And who am I to interrupt that?
Yeah.
Do I really, what's there is underneath there. I'm sure you also have that too. Sometimes you realize there's something under there that I don't have the qualifications to deal with. And do I really want it to come to the surface in a class with 20 or 30 people in it?
I feel like if there's an invitation to feel, then there's a natural protective mechanism where people won't if it's too much. And, you know, I definitely see this with embodied yoga because the archetypal shapes we use really expose quite strong emotional patterns. And sometimes people just aren't ready to see something which is obvious to literally everyone else in the room. And I've learned to just go, okay, and walk away. and like, I'm not going to make a big deal. Sometimes at the expense of my own ego, if they're like arguing about something or saying it doesn't work or whatever, I'm kind of just go, all right, fair play, let's just walk away. And sometimes, you know, those actual people, I was at a yoga festival doing a class and someone just wasn't ready for something in the class. And later on that evening, when they had a glass of wine, they came and found me and said they had this insight, like, you know, 6 hours later. And I was like, oh, cool. You know, needed the glass of wine to feel safe and relaxed, I guess, you know. So, you know, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to move towards wrap up here. Time has flown by, which is always a good sign. You talked about, like, you know, what people aren't learning in regular yoga classes. I'm curious about that. There's so much more here, but we're nearly out of time. So is there any kind of key messages you want to put out there before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think one of my most important messages, I think, across the board, no matter what kind of practice you're doing, and I know we mostly talk about yoga, but I love that your listeners are multidimensional and do other things. I think it's that we have been sort of handcuffed for many years by the idea of tradition, including the philosophy, including, movement and philosophy. We've had this vinyasa, and then this is Patanjali Sutras, which why are we still focusing on the sutras? It's not a hatha text. It's not even a householder's text. But we don't have time for that. But I think a lot of people felt like that that idea of that tradition made it more authentic.
Yep.
And so for many people, even though they were starting to feel things in their body that were, perhaps injuries, perhaps disagreeing with things they were being taught, people kept their mouth shut because they thought, don't go against tradition. And I think, you know what, when you really look at the history of yoga, if you look at the history of any modality, whether it's a spiritual modality, a physical modality, it has evolution to it. And it's always been evolving. And right now we have to embrace what yoga can be so that it can serve us into the future, instead of getting so hung up on what it might have been 200 years ago. I'm not an Indian man living 200 years ago. I'm a white Western middle-aged woman living right now. Who do I owe responsibility to?
Yeah.
Me.
And I feel like that being a slave to tradition usually comes from a sense of insecurity, or just plain conformity. That's just what I was told. And it's weird because we wouldn't do that around so many other aspects of life, And I see the extremes really in yoga. Like, one is you have to do the tradition, which isn't really a tradition going back as far as it says normally, as you pointed out. And the other one is just sort of anything goes. And I feel like in this podcast, you've kind of walked that line, which I really like, of, okay, yes, yoga needs to be awareness based. Yes, it is about developing, and it's not any old bullshit. And it can evolve. And I feel like that's a sophisticated position that people sort of swing one way or the other way.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to wrap up. So in terms of finding your stuff, it's brahmaniyoga.com, right? That's BRAHMAN for November, yoga.com. Anywhere else where people can find you online?
Yeah, you can find everything I'm doing and what the usual, like Facebook or Instagram. I don't know. You usually won't see my face on there, my cat's face, but
if there's cats, I'm going to find you. If there's cats, I'm in if there's cats. So you've got social media, you've got all this stuff we talked about, a newsletter there, teachers around the world, as I said, in all kinds of countries there, Germany, United States, Austria, Zurich, Netherlands, they're all over the place. So people that may have the sort of similar approach or a similar vibe, if they're, they've got, their own teachers. So they can all find that on the website. Cool. Well, this has been fun. Any kind of one sentence final message about the body for our listeners?
Oh, one sentence about the body. You're the only one that lives in your body. So trust that.
Julie, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.